Gardeners out there, what's right around the corner? What's next week? First day of spring next week coming up. What is it? 19th, 20th. 20th is first day of spring. So this kind of goes hand in hand with our program today, which is planning and preparing the garden for spring. And before we get started real quick, everybody should have gotten one of these, Texas Gardening. Some of you probably have quite a collection of them by now. If you do, just bring them back in. I'll reuse them. But these are a hot commodity. They're not making them anymore. I don't know why. It's really a really good pamphlet. And I'll just take a second. When you go through it, it gives you the zone. Of course, Texas does their own zoning. But then when you go through the book, it'll give you what season you're in. I believe we're in zone, by the map, zone 3. And it will give you all of the planting dates and time frames. So when you go over and open it up, it'll give you the season and the zone you're supposed to be in. And it will give you all of the dates that you have, the windows you have for that growing season. So this is really a handy little tool to do your gardening by. And it covers both spring and the fall. So you have that one. And you should have picked up companion planting. This year I'm pushing companion plants. Again, it's springtime, so as you begin to select your vegetables, take a look at the companion planting guide and select those vegetables that go well with it. For example, tomato and basil are really good companion plants. And then last but not least, spring gardener time frame. This hasn't changed at all. This is still just another good planting guide. And I've already had 2 or 3 people ask. Yes, we have changed zones. We are no longer 8B, we are now 9A. 9A, so it's going to be fun to see how all this pans out. And it's a USDA hardiness zone. So I always take a minute just to explain this real quick, because what does that really mean to us? That is depicting, and if you look at zone 9A, I think we're 20 to 25 degrees. So it's really the winter temperatures that we get. So when you buy your plants, you need to make sure those plants will survive a 20 to 25 degree weather. And that's why USDA uses that zone 9A. So really it's all about how hardy the plant is during our winter time frame. That's what USDA zone maps are. And one is dearest to my heart, and no one leaves the room unless this is done, the surveys. And I will give you a heads up. There is a before and an after. You can do the before, which is your knowledge level, but you can complete the entire survey in about 3 minutes. And then at the end of the program, all you have to do is go back and fill in the 4 or 5 slots for your level of understanding after. So it's spring. It's time to wake up that garden. It's time to get going. And I think for me, it's a fun time because during the winter time, I plant a lot of things that I want to do. I want to incorporate in my garden. So this is a time to bring everything to fruition. So when you start out doing this, you got to do some planning. You have to look at what am I going to do different this year? What am I going to do better this year? And with the weather changes, and I just looked at the weather and I thought, wow, here we are. We're not quite mid-month of March, and the weather forecast today for the San Antonio area was 84 degrees. Cotulla was 98 degrees for the high. And I cringed and I went, oh my goodness. You know, what are we in for? How many people went to the spring seminar in New Braunfels? One? Folks, that's probably one of the best things you could ever go to. They had some really excellent speakers there. Try to get in on that. You get 6 hours of education in one day. And they do. They had some really good speakers, and they had a great speaker that talked about weather changes coming up, and his comment was, over the next decade, we're looking at some really horrific weather conditions that we haven't seen in 100 years. And a lot of it's got to do with the volatility of the storms we're going to get, and a lot of it's going to do with how much high heat we're going to get. So it's coming. So 9A is a big change, and it's going to change a lot of how we do. I started plugging in some dates on when should we plant, and I'm going, what? You know, I'm doing transplants in February, and I'm going, wow, that's a little early, you know, because in the past it was March, and I have some naysayers say I will never put anything in the ground until 1 April. That's going to have to change, because if you wait till 1 April to put something in the ground and it's got a 90 to 100 day maturation date, guess what? The heat's going to take it from you. Okay, that is guaranteed. So you have to really shift what you're doing. So the other thing, and I bring this up, remember to record significant weather events. And that never meant so much as till I went to the spring seminar, because the individual giving that was talking about weather events, and he was talking about the Smokehouse Creek fire. How many people are aware of that? Up in the Panhandle? So that was the fire that started in the Panhandle, went all the way up to Oklahoma, and it was 1 mile wide. And then the cold front came in, and it went from 1 mile wide to 70 miles wide and just swept across the Panhandle. And the truth of the matter was, it was preventable. And as he put it, we haven't seen anything like that in 100 years. All the warning signs were in place. We hadn't seen them in such a long time, we didn't know what to make of them. So there are warning signs that stipulated the cause of how that fire perpetuated through the Panhandle. So I always go back and say, record significant events. When you plant this year, mark down when you're doing your plants. Mark down when you're doing your direct seeding. The other thing too is sketch out your garden plans. My push this year is on pollinators, and when you look at pollinators, milkweed for the monarchs, dill, fennel for swallowtails, a lot of your herbs for the bees. So kind of take care of them, because remember last year we had a lot of issues with our bees, with insects, because of the heat. There was nothing there to feed on. Everything was dead. Okay, and then decide what you still need to fill in the spaces before you go to the store. Okay, I didn't do that, and my wife went, "You spent what?" Yeah, I did. Okay, and then attend a horticultural show, and I think that really is important, because it's a time. I mean, it was such a great time to go to New Braunfels, see a lot of friends that I hadn't seen in a year, sit there and talk, and then have that. It's fun to go out and do that and share your stories of what happened last year. Why did your garden blow up in July or August? And really, what do you do when it's 110 degrees outside? What do you do?
Go back inside.
We had so many phone calls last year of, what do I do? All my flowers are dropping off my tomatoes. There's nothing you can do. The plant is going into survival mode, and it drops its flowers, it'll drop fruit. It's just trying to stay alive, and flowers and fruit is not part of that scheme. And then last but not least, get a soil test. Try to stay on top of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Prepare and maintain, and we're really looking at getting your beds ready to go for the spring planting this year, what you're going to do. So I look at this as, how do I know what to do with my bed if I haven't done a soil test? I don't know what the activity is there, especially after last year. I did a lot of planting during the fall, and it was so hot that I actually had cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower bolt before it produced anything. And I went, I've never seen cabbage bolt. But it did, and it was really a pretty flower. Not that I'm trying to grow it for the flower, but I went, wow, cabbage does bolt. Okay, that's how hot it was. So it takes, you know, it's a cool weather crop that I was growing in cool weather time frame, but the heat was still there. We're still dealing with it. So you got to keep that in mind. So at the same time, when you start looking at soil, okay, you're looking at the soil temperature. Is it better for me to do transplants? Is it better for me to do seeds? How do I do that? So monitoring soil temperature is one thing. And then the other thing you got to look at is begin to monitor your plants. So this is the time where you start looking for those insects that you're going to be dealing with, aphids, spider mites, all of those things. It's the time to order the yellow sticky traps and get your yellow sticky traps out there and get them ready to put in the garden so that you have, and I call that my scouts. The yellow sticky traps are my scouts. I can put them in certain rows and capture certain insects. That way I know what insecticides or pesticides I need to go buy. I have a market farmer I helped last year, and his entire tomato crop was devastated because of the tomato fruit worm. And it's taken me 3 years to get it through his head that their life cycle is they hatch, they have the worms, they devastate every tomato, and then they drop to the soil and they harbor in the soil until next spring. And guess what you got? So if you don't go back and take care of them in the soil, you're going to have the same thing year after year after year. So what we've had to do is move the tomato crop to another area until we can get that soil bed squared away. So that's another way. And then controlling weeds. Always look at soil preparation starting from the winter forward. So a lot of times I have a bare bed or I'm flipping beds and I don't want it full of weeds, so I'll do a lot of cover cropping. My cover cropping is clover. I do a lot of clover, something small, something that's manageable, something that I can cut with a pair of lopping shears, cut and chop, drop it. I do a lot of that to help control my weed situation. So the other thing, and let's start looking at how we're going to plan. Let's get this bed ready, and I have to rewind the clock back to probably January, December is where you need to go back and say, okay, I'm done with the heat. I'm done with any fall crops, so now let me get this bed ready for next spring. So you do. So I kind of go back and call it remineralize, and really it's taking a soil test to find out where you are. Where's my soil at? It's part of your soil fertilization program. And when I say it's part of that, because when you do a soil test, it's kind of a roadmap. It's a roadmap of where you're going from here. Now, why would you go spend $200 on fertilizer not knowing what the soil test was, and you may not even know how to, or you may not even have to buy it? So that's the importance of doing the soil test. You do that to find out how you're going to get from there to there. That's the whole purpose of that. And there's some other things you can do as you go along to help you defray the cost of fertilizers. Legumes. You plant legumes as a cover crop. Legumes put nitrogen back in the soil. So if you know that, then plant legumes during the fall and you don't have to worry about going out and buying bags of fertilizer to take care of that. So that's just looking at different ways that you can do this. The other thing is keep the soil critters and microbes fed. And at the end of the year, we have a lot of debris in the garden, at least I do. And I just leave it in the garden because it provides a food source. As it decomposes, it provides a food source for the microbial life that's in the soil. And as they eat all of that and it runs through their system, they're putting nutrients back in the soil. So you always keep feeding them. Leave that debris there. It'll get consumed over the winter months. When springtime comes, whatever's left, you'll rake it out and get rid of it. But you got to keep this going. A lot of people will take all the stuff out of the garden, put it in their compost, and leave the ground bare. All the microbial life goes dormant. Some of it will die, but for most part, it goes dormant until we get something back in place to keep them fed. And a lot of times is what you're transplanting. Keep it covered, chop it, drop it, and top it. That's basically back to cover cropping. Leave the roots in the soil. So many times I've talked to gardeners that go in and say, well, how do you clean up your garden? Well, I just go along and I just pull everything out of the ground. And I go, don't do that, okay? Take the tops off and just leave it there. But the root structure, we just got through out on the farm. We did daikon radishes, and the daikon radishes were probably that tall. Some of them were that big around, huge daikon radishes. But it had a huge aphid infestation. So the only thing we could do was flail the top, because the tops were up that high, flail the tops to get all of those insects dead down, and then bring in the tiller and then till everything under. Now we only set the tiller about 2 to 4 inches down because we want those radishes to decompose in the ground and create all those valleys for water and nutrient to get into. So it creates little homes for all that microbial life to stay there. So don't pull up your roots. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower coming out of the winter, I just chop it off even with the ground, leave the root structure in there, let it decompose and feed that microbial life. And then last but not least, always add the compost. Most gardeners will have enough debris out of the garden to have an adequate compost pile. If you don't, there are so many opportunities. The mushroom farm right down the road, you can get mushroom compost. You can go to any of the nurseries and get compost, but you need to use compost on these gardens and get them ready for the spring. And then last but not least is the cover crops. So know your soil, and when I say know your soil, if you have a lot of soil compaction in your garden, and it could be from mechanical means, it could be from walking in the beds, anything that's compacting the soil, you need to look at doing grains. Do rye, oats, any of those will help get the soil structure back. Legumes, peas, clover, fetch, those are all nitrogen fixers. Those are all things that you can plant where you don't have to go buy fertilizer, because those things are putting in. So with legumes, and I don't have a picture, I may add it. So when the legumes grow, the root structure, it actually pulls the nitrogen from the air, pulls it through the plant, and it goes down to the root ends, and it creates little nodules on the roots, and they'll actually turn a pinkish color when you see them. When you pull them out, you'll see these little pink nodules. Those are nitrogen modules that the legumes are pulling out of the air. So another way to fertilize. Broadleaves, buckwheat, that's another one I use in the garden because I can keep it small and I can chop it and drop it. But buckwheat is good for keeping weeds out. If you're not going to plant a fall crop, then put buckwheat there. And with the buckwheat, that'll suppress the weed activity. And again, chop and drop, it just decomposes, and you're building the soil as you go along. And here we are. Wake up the garden. It's time to get going. You've done all the things that you need to do during the winter months to get that soil prep to do spring. So waking it up now is going back, getting all the debris off the top of the bed, get all that off. If you've mulched to get rid of your weeds, pull the mulch back, because the key now is get the soil warm enough to where you can either transplant or do direct seeding. You got to get the soil temperature at the right temperature. No different than doing germination. If I germinate a tomato, it has to be 75 to 85 degrees to germinate. If I do it in my soil bed, it has to be 75 to 85 degrees to germinate. It's not air temperature, it's soil temperature. So pull that all back and get it going. And we're still, next week we have what, 41 degree weather coming up? Okay. I have my temperature probe out there every day taking soil temperature. So, you know, and I did. Last week I did my first 20 tomatoes. Probably Saturday I will finish up with my tomatoes and probably get some squash and cucumber plants started in mine. But weather's coming. And if you're doing it, you need to have a plan to protect them. Frost cloths, whatever it takes.
What's your soil temperature right now?
Yesterday I took it was 65. Okay. 65 degrees. I'm full sun, no shade. Out at the farm, he was probably about 72, 74. One corner of the lot was in the shade that was down to probably 58. But you can buy a real inexpensive soil temperature probe. I'm not going to tell you, I've found my wife's kitchen an indispensable tool supply that caused me a lot of trouble. So she had a meat thermometer, and it was real good, and I said, well, meat thermometer, you put it in, it takes temperature, should do the same thing with soil, and it does. It does. I can go out, and I took it, and I put it in the soil, and I got it. Okay, my only demise was I should have wiped it off before I put it back in the drawer, and she pulls out the user and goes, what is all this dirt on my meat thermometer?
How far down do you put your probe to check?
6 to 8 inches.
Okay.
That's all you need to go. That's your growing medium. That's where the root structure is going to be 6 to 8 inches down. That's all you need. Okay, so let's get going. Soil bed prep. I always put this up here because you have to think about what did I do last year. This is where the journal comes in. I mean, I know most of us grow for families. You have 5 or 6 beds, but I work with market farmers that have 15 or 20 beds, and sometimes they don't remember exactly what they put there, and that's where the journal comes into play, because now you have to determine what you're going to plant where. So heavy feeders. So these are things like tomato, broccoli, cabbage, corn, eggplant. Those are all heavy feeders, which means if you're going to use that bed, you're going to have to put fertilizer in there. Those plants completely depleted all of the nutrients that's being used by those particular plants. Light feeders, garlic, onion, peppers, potatoes, radishes, soil builders, peas, beans, cover crops such as clover. And that's only because of the nitrogen, and some of the grains fit into that category too. So you got to remember, rotate these. It would be, this soil bed was a heavy feeder, okay, then I'm going to rotate it to a light feeder, I'll put that in there, and then on my second year I'm going to do a soil builder, so I'll put this in that bed. So now I'm building nitrogen in the soil where I don't have to buy fertilizer. Now I'm adding soil builders back to the soil, and I'm just doing that. And that's where having a journal helps you do that. Rotate those 3. Then, of course, compost. Any good aged compost. Aged, not green manures. Aged. 2 inches. Just put it on top of the bed. Do you have to rototill it in? No, you don't. Do you have to fork it in? No, you don't. You just basically incorporate it into the top 2 inches of the soil. And I just spread mine on the top of it. I take an iron rake and I rake it in, and I have just amended my beds. 2 inches.
Can you leave some of the screens on for just a few minutes longer, 30 seconds longer?
Yes, ma'am.
We're trying to.
Yes, ma'am. I can.
Okay.
Just holler if I need to go back.
The previous one, please.
Okay. Do you have a phone?
I can take a picture.
You can do a picture. That works quicker than you writing. Trust me.
Last one more time.
Yeah, I can go back. Oop. Right there? Or the one before that? That one. Okay. Yeah, just photos are quicker, and you don't have to zoom in. Just take a picture of it, because when you take the picture, you can zoom the picture out. Just so you'll know. Okay. So raking and tilling, so you're prepping your bed, you have everything in place, and again, think, what am I going to do? If I'm going to do transplanting, I really probably don't have to worry about how flat it is. I would like it to be flat, but if I'm doing direct seeding, I want it as flat as I can. Okay, I want that seed to be able to get in there and germinate, and or I may be using mechanical seed dispensers to do that, and it really needs to be a fine soil. It really needs to be pretty flat. So rake it in, make it as level as you can. Any weeds? The general rule of thumb in bed preparation for me is I prep my bed 2 weeks before I intend on doing any transplanting and direct seeding, more importantly. If I'm transplanting, 2 weeks before I prep the bed, because that'll give 2 weeks for whatever weed seed I've disturbed to come to surface where I can either flame it. At the big garden we flame, but in my personal garden I have a Colonier hoe, and I use that hoe to dispatch any of those weeds, and they're only like that, and all you have to do is just rake it over the top. But that 2 weeks is to get rid of any weed seed that pops up for that again. And then final step, just level it off and you're ready to go. Fertilization. Take a picture of this. Take a picture of this one. This is pretty important. Spring fertilizer versus winter. Texas A&M has come up with this ratio, and that ratio is specifically the fertilizer recommendations they provide. A good example is springtime, use 19.5-9 during the spring, and then in 18.6-12 during the fall. And just do the math. Spring 19.5-9, it's a 4-1-2 ratio. 18.6-12 during the fall, it's a 3-1-2 ratio. That ratio is always based on that center figure. So you can do this 2 or 3 different ways, but think about what I'm getting ready to say. You can broadcast it. You can broadcast it into your soil bed. You can put your seeds in and run a line of fertilizer down the seed line, or when you do your transplants, you can put it about 6 inches away from the transplant. But food for thought. If I broadcast it, what am I feeding?
Weeds.
Weeds, absolutely. So when you start your fertilization process and you start doing this fertilizing, think about, what am I going to bring to the surface if I just broadcast it? You know, you want to get in the habit of, and now I actually have an auger, I drill my holes, and everything goes in the hole. Everything goes in the hole. All my fertilizer, everything, get everything started. When I do, how many do onions? Okay, so how do you fertilize your onions? You have a roll. You have a roll of onions, okay, how do you fertilize them?
A side dress.
About 6 inches away from the onions, you run a side dress. And you dig down about 4 inches, you put all your fertilizer in there, and then you cover it back up with soil. And then every week you just hit the water on that fertilizer, and that feeds your onions. That's how you fertilize your onions. Most root crops are the same way. And I always put this up here for people that are making new gardens or making changes in their gardens. Southwest, northeast, what's best? Well, actually south. If your garden is south-facing garden, it's ideal. You get that warm sun in the morning and a little bit of a light shade in the afternoon. West-facing, you're going to get sun all day long. It's going to be hot. North-facing is going to be a little bit cool. If you're doing shade-type crops, it would be best to have that facing north. And east-facing gardens, morning sun allows plants to dry out during the daytime, but actually it's the south-facing ones that are the best. Okay, any questions on that before we get into the seed calendar? Okay. Probably the oldest, wisest maxim, and again, it's back to creating a journal, okay, is I need to understand my growing season. I need to understand the maturation of the seeds that I'm getting ready to either direct seed or I'm germinating to grow a transplant. I need to understand that in order to get a seed calendar going. So I know that I'm planting things in the growing season that are going to last and I'm going to get produce from it versus missing the mark and losing the race. And one of my mentors, David Rodriguez, you got to run the race, run the race, run the race. And that race is getting your produce before the heat hits. Because once the heat hits, it's done. I don't care where you're at. I don't care where the plant's at. You're done. The plant can't take it. So you kind of mark on your garden calendar, and I have a sample of how you do this. Arrange your seed packets in a drawer. Go by maturation date. This is when I'm going to plant in March, April, May, June, or how many times I'm going to do it if I'm doing succession planting. Check your seed packets. We'll circle back to that because there's a lot of info on that. And once seeds are sown, mark the calendar again. And I've already asked 2 or 3 folks today, not here, oh, you already planted, so when is it mature? When are you going to be able to harvest? I don't know. Do you have the seed packet? No, I threw it away. I said, well, you can go Google the seed packet and get how many days, because that's what you're looking at. How many days down the road can I expect to have that ready to harvest? And the Texas Gardening Guide will help you with that. That sets up the dates. So 3 ways. So directly into the garden, start the seeds indoors and then do a transplant. Or you can go to the nursery and buy a transplant. Or you can go to the Silver Center this Saturday and get lots of plants. Okay, they're selling a whole bunch of plants. And we have free plants over here. Just take them as you exit. Before you give me the survey, then you get the plants. Okay, starting seeds indoors. Why do we do that? Well, you have to understand again, the race is the heat factor, okay? And it's how long it's going to take to grow that. A good example, some varieties of tomatoes, 120 days. Okay, if I wait till the May time frame to try and put them in, even as a transplant, try and put them in the ground, you think they're going to make it by the time the heat? No. So it's a matchup, and that's why I like these little guides, because it does the math for you. It kind of gives you an idea of what to do. So early vegetables, allowing you to stretch it out, wider choice of cultivars, protection from pests, saving seeds cheaper than buying store-bought transplants, and satisfaction that you grew your own. Sometimes you order a seed pack and the germination rate's not there. I have found pepper plants to be a prime example. The hotter the pepper, the longer the germination. So I don't know how many jalapeno, I think it was Johnny's hot rod peppers, I threw away because I said, well, it's been 5 weeks and nothing's germinated, and went, the seeds are bad. No, they take 45 to 60 days to germinate, you know. So you really got to watch, you know, the germination time frame and what you're buying. So that's another good thing to keep in mind. And we're gonna look at this a little bit deeper. What seeds to grow? We run into this all the time, and people will just arbitrarily throw away their seeds. And I go, why'd you do that? I mean, I bought seeds this year that were 30 seeds for $5. Sweet Success cucumbers, I like to dyed, 8 cucumber seeds, and it was $11. $11. And there are not too many seed supply companies that do Sweet Success. But they can be really expensive. So when you have an old packet of seeds and you're unsure, it's a very quick check. Just take 10 seeds out, wet a paper towel, put them in a paper towel, fold it up, put it in a baggie, and leave it there for maybe a week, 2 weeks, whatever the germination time frame should be that says on that packet. And then open it up, and then count them. Okay, if you only have 5 that germinated, then you know the seeds that you have in that packet, only 50% of them will germinate, which means if I want to grow 10 tomato plants, I got to plant 20 seeds to get 10 tomato plants, because at least 50% of them will not germinate. So the best way to get around it, sometimes just buy new seed every year, but not everybody can afford that. Okay, seeds are going up. Transplants are going up too. I've seen 4-inch containers now up to $6. And I went, what? $6 for 4-inch plants. They're probably, I say 4-inch, but I think they're a tad bigger than a 4-inch plant, but they're there. I just buy new seeds. Check what's online sales stores, make a list of what you need, organize your seeds by the growing time frame, order catalogs in seed stores. I do Johnny's. Johnny's seed catalog is digital. You can now get the digital version, and you can actually load it right on your phone, and you can pull up Johnny's and take a look at what they got. That's one way. I get probably 25, 30 seed catalogs every year. Most of them go in the trash. There's only certain ones I do. So when we're talking about seeds, I always advocate this. You want to try and buy from companies that are local, that are acclimated to our time zone. So 2 of them that pop out real quick is Wilhite Seed Company, Poolville, Texas, down the street from us. So Wilhite, all their seeds are grown here in Texas, so you can pretty well say they're acclimated. Another one is Brim Seed Company. Brim Seed Company is up in Waco. I've been there several times. Brim, when you go to their seed catalog online, it will say acclimated, so you know that that particular variety of the plant was actually grown here, Waco, grown here in Texas. And I will say this, another invaluable source that's right above us, the seed store. I was absolutely amazed to go up there and see members that have got seeds that have been grown here for 50 and 60 years. I mean, how acclimated can you get? You know, so I was up there the other day. I didn't have a whole bunch of time, but I'm certainly going back through the seeds there. In fact, one of our board members has a bush bean that's been in her family for 60 years. Her family has grown that for 60 years. So there's another good resource right upstairs, the seed supply.
Where's the seed store?
Upstairs. In the MG office where the library is. Yeah, they're all, most of them are members. General public has come in to get seeds from the store, and they donate seeds. So they're all marked. They're up there, so it's another good source to get seeds.
But is it still just Wednesday?
Yeah, it's still just Wednesday.
What time? 1 to 3.
1 to 3. Ernestine Sykes. 1 to 4?
2 to 4.
2 to 4. There we go. We got it right. 2 to 4.
Thank you.
Wednesday. Seed packet knowledge, and I'm going to go through this quick. The back of the seed will give you the planting depth, the seed spacing, between rows, days to germination, and this is where you start doing the math, you know, like the movie The Martian. Do the math. Days to germination, 14 to 21. Spacing after thinning, and days to maturity. The thing about growing indoors and getting them to the point where they're transplants for your outside garden is the hardening off process. People overlook that. You've got to, when you get 3 to 4 true leaves on that transplant, you need to take them outside. And the first day, maybe an hour, 2, shade, and then every day you just increase the amount of time until you get the plant where it's hardened off. And hardened off means it's going to be growing out there for the rest of its life cycle. And you have to acclimate it to that because it's been in the house, it's been under sunlight, it's had a nice little warm heat mat keeping it going. So all those things are there. So all we're doing is acclimating it to where it's going to go. And here, hybrids, Wilhite, Poolville. And then Heirloom, Brim Seed Company is in Waco. Hybrids and heirlooms. Remember hybrids? If you're seed saving, you can't save hybrids. They're from 2 parents. And when you do that, if you save seed, you don't know what parent. It doesn't stay true to nature. Okay? It's the same way when you get cross-pollination. Some people will say, oh, my squash looks weird this year because I planted it next to my cucumber and it cross-pollinated. And I go, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Cross-pollination does not affect the plant, the seed that you put in the ground. What it does affect is when that plant grows, the seed it disperses, that seed is affected by cross-pollination. But if you put in a celebrity tomato and you put it next to a cucumber plant and something happens to your tomato, it's not a cross-pollination issue. You either have a nutrient deficiency or something else going on in that. It doesn't lose the characteristics that was put in the ground with that seed or that transplant. It's only when it grows the new fruit. Okay, plants not started from seed. Asparagus, garlic, horseradish, a whole bunch of them. Most of us I just got through doing asparagus bed, revamping that, getting the old out, getting new asparagus crowns put in. Getting a little late for onions. Chives, yeah, you can.
I really thought we couldn't grow asparagus because it's so hot down here.
No. I have a market farmer. He has 2 200-foot rows, 2 200-foot rows of asparagus, and it grows fine. But I will say this, he spends more time growing that asparagus than I want to. And that's probably why he's so successful. He knows how to grow the asparagus so that it is a successful crop. And he puts a lot of maintenance in it too. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into that. We just got through, I just did a weeds presentation and there was nut sedge in the crowns and I went, oh my God. So I was just going down, pulling it out, and then somebody came up and went, what are you doing? I said, I'm pulling nut sedge. He said, no, you're not. I said, yeah, I am, look. And he says, where's the nut? And I went, what? Another lesson learned. Nut sedge has a nut. Okay, so you really have to dig down in the ground and get that nut exposed and get the nut out because it's just going to keep regrowing with the nut. Okay, so yeah, that was a wake-up call. I said, no wonder it was so prolific in my lawn. That's why. Okay, after germination, watering. Make sure you stay on top of the watering, especially with our 9A weather. Weeding, keep it weeded. Mulch, make sure that once you, especially with transplants, once you get the transplant in, get it mulched, get your fertilizer down, get it mulched, and get it watered. And then, like onions, thin them out, carrots, thin them out, whatever needs to be thinned. And that's more direct seeding than it is anything else. So this is kind of what a seed calendar looks like. I just went cauliflower, cabbage, peppers, tomatoes. You plug in the dates and the time frames so you can go in from a calendar and you can go, okay, I'm going to do cauliflower. I'm going to start it 16 January, grow it inside, get it to a transplant. I'm going to harden it off in March and then it goes in the ground. And then down here about the May time frame, I'm going to harvest it. That's mine, okay? So if you notice, I don't do any gardening past June, okay? That's what I program. June 15th will probably be the last part, only because I'm allowing the broccoli to provide more of the florets as side shoots. And I just let those go out. So, I mean, that's how a seed calendar works. Now, I know some of you are going to go, wow, that's a lot of math. Yeah, it is. However, okay, you can go out to Farmer's Almanac and Google calculator, and it will do all the math for you. It will do all the math. Okay, so there are calculation tools out there that will plug in the produce that you want to grow and give you all the information. You don't have to do the math. I'm old school. I'm not always going to have a calculator out in the middle of Timbuktu. I have to think with my head, what do I have to do? What's the time frame I have to do? So I always keep that. And it comes second nature. Okay, whoops, growing season. So with the new 9A, we now have 261 days. And for some people it says, ooh, we can garden all year long. Yes, we can. How productive are we going to be? I'm not so sure about that. But it's always based on the difference between first frost, March, last frost, November. Frost dates, average, spring and fall. You go out to Farmer's Almanac. I've already done the math. Here's Seguin. Okay, so last frost date's March 4th. First frost date, November 21st. So how much of a change is that? So last year, 8B, it was March or April 11th or 12th last year, so it's backed up quite a bit. I mean, the heat factor is kicking in. So when you got the Farmer's Almanac, this is what you're going to see. So you get this little graph of last frost day and first frost day, and I'm pessimistic when I look at this because I go, okay, so you're going to tell me on the 26th of February I got 90% chance that it's going to be 36 degrees. Okay, that's pretty cold for tomato plants. Okay, so 10% chance on April 12th that I'll keep my tomato plants. But is that a true statement? No, why? Because if it takes 90 to 120 days, where am I going to be? It's too late in the growing season to do that. So the general rule of thumb is you always split it down the middle. And there's a little bit of a risk factor, but I always go back and say, okay, I'm going to do the 50-50 chance. March 21st is my date. So it's right around the corner, and this weekend I'm going to be doing a lot of tomato planting. I'm going to put everything I can in the ground. And of course, whatever bed I have, I already have my frost cloths set up for next week. So if it gets below 50, I'll cover them up and I'll protect those plants so I don't lose them. So that's the other thing you have to think about when you're doing this is I can get a transplant in the ground, I can beat the heat, but what about the time that I get that little bit of a cold front that's going to wipe out my tomato plants? You got to have a system that supports protecting your plants. Doesn't do any good to grow something that you know is going to get killed because you don't have any protection for it. So this, well, it does. It's 9A is like this really dark brown here. So 9A, we're right in the middle of it. Here's Gonzales right here. 10A, of course, 10A down in the Rio Grande Valley, 10A, and then 8B back here. There's,
Question?
Yeah.
You mentioned tomatoes like 50 degrees. So is there a chart that also, because it's not a frost that you're worried about, it's just cold temperature. So
Yes,
how do you
and
see that information?
so Farmer's Almanac will give you that too. But here for tomato plants, and I'm a tomato plant grower, and I've done all that research. So at 50 degrees, it can devastate your tomato plants depending upon the variety. Okay. Some of the other plants at 50 degrees, it'll stop growing. It'll just stop growing. I'm not going to do anything else until it warms up. And then when it warms up, it will continue to grow. Heat's always the driving factor for growth in plants. The hotter it is, the more they grow until it reaches that magic temperature where it can. But 50 degrees is pretty well the known temperature where 50 degrees, and let me back up because another excellent question. What do we mean 50 degrees? Outside temperature? No. Ground temperature. So you have to look at two things. You have to look at ground temperature and you have to look at ambient temperature. So if my ground temperature goes real low, it's not going to be able to support the life, as well as if my air temperature goes really low. And I can tell Farmer's Almanac has that, and you can go out to Aggie Horticulture. AggieHorticulture.tmu.edu, and you can get that same information as well. Okay, 13 zones. The A and B just represents a 5-degree increase in temperature. So when you go 8A, B, if you do an AB, it's 10 degrees difference. Okay, real quick. 261 days. We've talked about average last frost date, and crops you can plant, and I'm kind of getting into succession here. You have to look at what you're planting and how it fits into your growing season. I'll give you an example, 25 days to reach harvest. If I do radishes and my grow period is 100 days in succession, I can actually do 4 crops of radishes. Now we're going to look at this a little bit further down the road. And then if I were doing tomatoes and it was 90 days, I'm only going to get 1 crop. That's how that matches. That's a real simple look at how that matches up. And then why is it important to know frost dates? Because you get light freeze, moderate, or severe freezes. If you get a light freeze, 29 to 30, it'll kill all your tender plants. Anything that's hardy, 25 to 28, it's going to kill them. And then severe freeze, 24 degrees and below. And sometimes it's not just a matter of a single night. Remember 3 years ago we had the hard freeze. We had, 4 days? It took everything. So it's relative to not just how cold it is, but how cold it is for how long. Sometimes a lot of plants can take that one night, you can cover them up, and it's done. But if you get it for a week, 4 days, no, they can't recover. Okay, real quick, I'm going to go through warm season crops. And back to your question, problematic temperatures. Warm season vegetables are killed by frost and suffer when the air temperature goes below 50. That goes for soil as well. When you get below 50, you got an issue. Temperature affects plant growth. That's always a key factor. So, what are the very tender vegetables? These are ones we plant in late spring, early summer. So these are tender. These are all warm season vegetables, but the tender ones are the snap beans, sweet corn, spinach, those are all, okra, tomatoes, those are all considered tender. So when it hits 50 degrees, soil or air, they're going to take a hit. It's going to hurt them. And then the next one, very tender vegetables, lima beans, cucumbers, eggplant, and again, they're all warm season, but those are classified as very tender vegetables. So you gotta, my key to this is know what you're planting and have the devices in place to protect them. Whether it's an insect cloth, whether it's frost cloth, or whether it's a sunblock, some type of sunshade. You got to protect your crop from the elements. So, real quick summary. This is just warm season crops, so you can see in the February time frame. You can do sometimes double planting, even tomatoes. You can do double planting, peppers the same way. So that's your sweet spot right there. Growing temperature is not optimal, again 50 and below. The only way you can correct that is greenhouse, cold frame, plastic tunnel, row cover, cloche, any of those. I use a hoop system and I use frost cloth to protect my crops. And I use insect cloth as well as sunshade cloth during the summer months to protect it from sun scald. And we're going to see, you'll see more of that as we get through these cool season crops. Same thing. Cool weather crops do not grow well when the air temperature is greater than 75. And trust me, I found that out this year. Okay, I planted, and I did. By the growing period, I planted it right on time. However, it was so hot that everything I planted as a cool season crop bolted. And I will. That's the first time I've ever seen cabbage bolt. But it definitely bolted. Okay, cool season, they're either hardy or half hardy. So hardy, cool season, not affected by frost. Asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Almost all of those fit into that category. And then half hardy are the short-term cauliflower and those are all half hardy. And again, have the material there to protect them. The same way, and I always say cool season crops, you grow more cool season crops than you do summer crops. You have a longer period to grow because you have a spring and a winter that you can do that in. Okay. Garden tools, real quick, I'm just going to advocate this while you're prepping. Part of that is getting your tools ready to go. So make sure, you clean up your tools. You can clean up forks, shovels. All of that can be done. Get that done. Get all of the supplies you need on order, all your seeds. And then I just added this, hot climates. And we got a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go through a couple of these because you've already seen it, but I wanted you to see this. This is crops destined for hot climates. These are vegetables that do extremely well in hot temperatures. Those all do very well. So get your pictures there. And notice the variety of tomatoes. Those are some of the older variety of tomatoes. The early girl, the better boy, the Serrano, Shishito. How many have grown Shishito? Love them. Love them. Little olive oil, put them in the frying pan and give them about 2 minutes and they are so good. Shishito, okra, eggplant, Armenian cucumbers. Those are some pretty good varieties. Now, this gets to where you need to decide whether you want to do transplant versus direct seed. And you just have to think about what you're doing and the weather conditions we're having. For example, I did a cool crop, and when I did the cool crop with the heat, it bolted. I won't make that mistake again. That just means I got to back up my transplant time frame. So that's something else you have to look at. I want to get to the dates. One more, right here. Transplanting versus direct seeding. Another reason, and we overlook this, it's when we grow a transplant or we do a direct seed, there is a plant disturbance issue that we run into. And just some things don't do well when you grow as a transplant and then you try to put them in the ground. So transplants that can tolerate root disturbance, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Transplants that can tolerate minimal, beans, corn, and ones that you can only sow, potatoes, radishes, turnips, a lot of your root crops and greens. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you can do as transplants versus direct seed. And you got to find that out. You got to do your homework and look at that. Herb seeds, so I just put this. If you're doing herbs, this is the start seed indoor, December and January. For arugula, January 6 through 20. When do you start them outdoors? This is in the February, March, so it's almost 2.5, 3 months down the road to do it outside. And then transplants, February 10th to March 30th. You can put them out as a transplant. So that gives you an idea of when to start the seed, when to do a direct seed, and when to do your transplant. First spring transplanting date, 19 Feb through 18 March. That's what 9A has given us. That's your spring transplanting. Direct seeding, 19 February through 25 March. This is showing you what succession planning is. For example, beans, 55 days maturation. With that schedule, currently in 9A, every 14 days you can plant a new crop of beans. Every 14 days you can start another crop of beans. You can do that 5 or 6 times. Radishes, look at radishes, 26 days harvest. Every 7 days you can start a new row of radishes. Every 7 days. So this is really, you know, how you can really produce a whole bunch of produce really short. First fall planting, 20 October, 19 December, just target dates. And then planting schedule for last frost, 4 March, first frost, 21 May. So first spring transplanting, 6 to 10 weeks. So that's really 25 December to 22 January. Direct seeding, 8 January through 5 February. Fall planting transplants, September to October, and fall direct seed, September to October. And your warm schedule, they stay pretty much the same. 18 March through 1 April. And it doesn't matter if you're doing transplants or direct seed. They're both, simply because they're a warm season crop. And last planting date, 8 July to 1 August. And I put this up here, the growing, cut, and come again. And when you look at some of these, you go, oh, well, okay. If I got it up here. Well, I think asparagus depicts it most. Cut and come again, asparagus, the more you cut it, the more it grows. So that's the cut and come again theory. But I put this up here because a lot of these plants are perennials, which means you can do this for the next 2 to 3 years and grow these plants. Radish, all herbs pretty well fit in that. Green onions, kale, garlic chives, asparagus, artichokes, garlic chives, probably the best herb I've run into. I had to go to my friend and get some from his mother's garden because they were so good. Garlic chives, not social garlic, garlic chives. Really good in omelets. Okay, any questions? I'll run over just a little bit. I know it was fast and furious. Yes?
How many seasons can you grow asparagus?
The crown's 2 years. It's 2 years to get them started, and then every year after you can get a crop.
Okay. Do they require like a really cold season?
No.
No.
They require a lot of maintenance. A lot of removing the crop debris.
Right.
Mulching during the winter months, they have to be mulched so you can get a good spring crop, and then it's removing the mulch and then letting it come up. But it's to me, asparagus, I've tried to grow it 3 or 4 times. I was not successful, but my market farmer grows 2 200-foot rows all the time, so it goes good.
I've got root nematodes in one of my beds. Root, not nematode.
Ricon Vicovi is who you need to call.
That's a phone call?
Ricon, yeah. They are the bug specialists for those nematodes.
And how do you spell it?
R-I-C-O-N, Vicovi. V-I-O-C-O-V-I. Okay, one last thing. I know there's more questions, but there's people holding tickets.